Hi everyone, this is Scott. For maps, references, and images for each episode, as well as links to all my social media, please go to ancientworldpodcast.com. And if you'd like to support the show, please go to patreon.com/theancientworld. Thanks again for listening. We left the Nile around 2900 BC at the end of the first Egyptian dynasty, 2.5 centuries inaugurated by Narmer and brought to an end by Ka'ah. Despite a lengthy rule of 33 years, Ka'ah apparently had no heirs, or at least none that survived him. On his death, two shadowy figures, Sneferu and Horusbird, fought for his vacant throne. But the last man standing at the end of the conflict was a figure named Hotep Sekemwi. From his name, which means the two powers are reconciled, we can probably assume a few things. That a civil war had likely transpired, that Hotep Sekemwi reconciled things, probably by introducing both rivals to the negotiating end of his mace, and that Egypt was unified under a new royal house at the start of the Second Dynasty. The First Dynasty kings were all buried at Abydos in the south, where at least we could get some useful information from the contents of their tombs. But, per John Romer, the Second Dynasty abandoned the royal burial ground at Abydos and moved their cemetery up to Saqqara near Memphis, where their tombs were swept away by later builders. Without their tombs, all we have for the Second Dynasty are a few partial and broken monuments and a mass of ambiguous descriptions. As a consequence, you'll hear a pretty heavy reliance on the good Dr. Romer for his wonderful insights and detailed scholarship on the era. In a broad sense, we know that resources were still being targeted and exploited to support the new royal court. Per Romer, under the Second Dynasty, large numbers of small copper mines were established in the eastern desert, and in between those and the Red Sea coast, a string of gold mines was established. They also enlarged an old Nakadan outpost at Elephantine, deep in the south near the Nile's first cataract, used for quarrying Aswan granite. Hotep Sekemwi was succeeded by Ra-Neb, the first pharaoh to include the sun god in his name, then by a pharaoh named Nin-et-Ger. A source called the Palermo Stone gives brief entries for 15 years of Nin-et-Ger's reign, the majority of which give Nile flood levels and honor the hawk god Horus. Nin-et-Ger was succeeded by Sekhemib, whose Serek was topped by a Horus falcon. Except, at some point during his reign, he changed his name to Peribsen and topped his new Serek not with a hawk, but with a rather unsettling beast called the Seth animal, which is clearly a reality show record scratch type of moment, so let's unpack it a bit. Nakadan culture had begun in the south, from which it had expanded down the Nile, then spread throughout the Nile Delta. When the First Dynasty had chosen Memphis as its capital, it made logistical sense. It was simply the best spot for controlling river traffic in and out of the Delta. But they'd also continued to honor their origins by building their tombs down at Abydos. The Second Dynasty, as I mentioned, started building their tombs at Saqqara, near Memphis, which the Nakadan peoples of Upper Egypt may have seen as cultural abandonment. These southerners hewed to the old god Set, or Seth, whose worship had started at Nakada. And however it transpired, they eventually managed to enlist an ally in the pharaoh Sekhemib/Peribsen. As Romer notes, based on the lack of finds with Peribsen's name in the north, some have theorized a religious war, with Peribsen and his southern Seth worshippers in conflict with the northern followers of Horus. Peribsen relocated his court to the south, likely to Hierakonpolis, while another pharaoh, or possibly several, took up rule in the north. Egypt was once again divided, and just like at the dynasty's founding, the last man standing at the end of the conflict claimed the role of factional peacemaker. Kasekhem emerged from the south, likely as successor to Peribsen. Surviving statues show him wrapped in a Hebsed cloak and wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt. Inscriptions record that he fought the northern enemy within the city of Nekheb, near Hierakonpolis, where he supposedly killed tens of thousands. After his victory, he took several steps to reconcile north and south. First, he changed his name from Kasekhem to Kasekhemwi, meaning the two powerful ones appear, and topped his Serek with the image of a hawk and a Seth animal side by side. He also moved his court back to Memphis and married a northern princess named Ni-Ma'at-Hop. And last but not least, when Kasekhemwi built his tomb, it was down in Abydos, not Saqqara. After Kasekhemwi's death, Ni-Ma'at-Hop ruled Egypt until her son came of age. One of her titles during the regency was She Who Says Something and It Is Done for Her Immediately, which kinda gives you the gist. In fact, Ni-Ma'at-Hop was so revered that she was later considered the founder of a new third Egyptian dynasty. In addition to the dynastic change, her son's ascension in the 27th century BC is also considered to mark the end of Egypt's early dynastic period and the birth of the Egyptian Old Kingdom. And why might this be, you ask? Well, to answer that, you simply have to meet Djoser. Like all good pharaohs, Djoser started off his reign by getting to work on his tomb. To do so, he enlisted a senior official named Imhotep, whose titles included Chancellor of the King of Lower Egypt, the first after the King of Upper Egypt, Administrator of the Great Palace, Hereditary Lord, Greatest of Seers. Imhotep, the builder, the sculptor, the maker of stone vases. Whether or not he was Greatest of Seers, Imhotep did have a crazy idea. To build the first royal tomb made not of mud brick, but of stone. The effort involved quarrying massive quantities of 3 types of stone, building the enormous new barges needed to float them, and providing tools and rations for an estimated core group of 3,000 workers. Per Romer, the 1,000,000 or so tons of cut stone blocks that were eventually used for the project probably required some 70 tons of copper to make tools for their fashioning, an unprecedented quantity of such metal in the ancient world. Apart from using stone, the original design was fairly traditional, just an extra-large mastaba or rectangular bench-style tomb. But Imhotep kept on being inspired, and his pharaoh continued to back him. At the end of several decades of work, something truly remarkable emerged. A series of mastabas of decreasing size stacked on top of one another, rising to a height of some 200 feet. In other words, a pyramid made of steps. Not only was Djoser's step pyramid the very first Egyptian pyramid, it was also the first monumental building anywhere in the world to be made entirely of stone. The pyramid was only the dominant structure within a much larger funerary enclosure. Romer notes that peripheral buildings recreate the forms of some of the traditional indigenous architecture of the settlements of the lower Nile, and that some open courts were likely reproduction of courts of royal audience and especially of slaughtering and tithing. One court's associated with the Hebsed festival, a ritual where the pharaoh symbolically reaffirmed his fitness to rule. 3 images of Djoser carved into walls beneath this pyramid depict the pharaoh running naked between fertile tracts of land. And as if all this wasn't enough, a box-like structure at the pyramid's north entrance held a painted limestone statue of Djoser, the earliest life-sized royal sculpture ever discovered in Egypt. While the step pyramid was his strongest statement, Djoser also honored his father Kaiechos by deploying the imagery of Seth and Horus reconciled. But it was lost on no one that Djoser's pyramid, i.e. his tomb, was raised at Saqqara near Memphis. In fact, from Djoser's time onward, pharaohs apparently felt secure enough to abandon this symbolic connection to their old Nakadan homeland. The pyramid tombs of the Egyptian Old Kingdom would all be raised in the north. The next 2 pharaohs who succeeded Djoser, Sekhemkhet and Kaba, each took a stab at building their own pyramid tombs, but neither was ever completed. The last Third Dynasty ruler, Huni, may have also given it a shot, but Huni's special contribution was something new. Per Romer, the pharaoh strung a series of small, solid step pyramids all along the Nile Valley, intended to collect offerings for the royal funerary cult. An inscription refers to the string of pyramids as the diadem of King Huni. Around 2600 BC, Huni was succeeded by his son-in-law, Sneferu, who inaugurated the 4th Egyptian dynasty. Sneferu started on his own step pyramid at the nearby Fayum oasis, but in year 14, his attention shifted to the plain of Dashur near Saqqara, where he decided to build a second pyramid, this time with much steeper sides. As Romer relates, the project involved the quarrying and transporting, cutting, hauling, and setting of well over 1,000 2.5-ton blocks of limestone every working day. Unfortunately, the construction site was poorly chosen, leading the pyramid to sink and twist as it grew. Despite Herculean engineering and logistical efforts, the fundamental challenges remained intractable, and work on the monument, now called the Bent Pyramid, was stopped after 15 years. At the time it was abandoned, the unfinished monument was already 3 times larger than Djoser's step pyramid. One thing I can tell you about Sneferu, he wasn't the type of guy to let a little thing like 2 failed pyramids and 29 years of wasted manpower and resources get him down. The pharaoh immediately shifted his attention to building pyramid number 3, as in 3rd time's the charm. All joking aside, the first 2 attempts weren't really a waste. Apart from obvious lessons learned, Romer notes that the system engaged by pyramid building, the expanded state networks, its colonies and quarries, its shipyards and storage enclosures, its mines and estates, had become the main factor of the increasing prosperity of the entire pharaonic state. I should also mention, while I'm here, that Sneferu wasn't just pyramids. His reign also saw the earliest depictions of Egyptian gods in temples adjoining the pyramid tombs, the first use of the oval cartouche to enclose pharaonic names, and the earliest recorded mention of the territorial divisions later known in Greek as nomes. But enough with the teasers. Let's get to Sneferu's ultimate success. His 3rd, final, and pretty darn perfect pyramid. The Red Pyramid of Dashur is considered both the first geometrically true pyramid and the model for all later pyramid complex construction, which included the pyramid itself, a valley temple, a mortuary temple, and a connecting causeway. The pyramid was designed to match the planned height of the earlier Bent Pyramid. But since the red pyramid sides were much less steep, doing so used around 1.5 times as much stone, or 5 times the stone of Djoser's step pyramid. Per Romer, the red pyramid's completion in just 11 years implies a tripling of the royal workforce just since the bent pyramid's construction. Egypt was now a pyramid-building machine. And when Sneferu died, the focus turned to his son. As Romer highlights, the monument raised for Khufu at Giza could have only been realized at that specific moment in pharaonic history, when the dynamic of his father's pyramid-building machine was running fast, and a second and third generation of core craftsmen still held the ability and experience to undertake the work. That work being to build a pyramid 1.5 times the size of his father's red pyramid, and with an even greater degree of perfection. The end result was the Great Pyramid, 5.5 million tons of rock piled on a 13-acre base, standing 480 feet high on a 300-foot cliff above the plain of the Nile. Built by a workforce ranging as high as 50,000 people. Per Romer, if built at the same rate as Sneferu's Red Pyramid, the project would have required 4,000 tons of limestone blocks to be hauled up ramps every workday, with each one set into place with astounding precision. As a final touch, the exterior was clad in shining white Tura limestone. Since we've reached the pinnacle, both literally and figuratively, of the Egyptian Old Kingdom, we've probably earned a brief pause. Maybe sit on the capstone, crack a beer, and just take everything in. Beyond the horizon, up north at Byblos, fine stone jars and offering tables were found from Khufu's reign. These and other Egyptian finds were recovered near Byblos's largest temple. A temple per Romer measured and laid out using Egyptian cubits. The temple was dedicated to Baalat Gabal, the Lady of Byblos, and the finds had likely been sent as gifts to a goddess who, per a temple ceiling, was equated to the Egyptian goddess Hathor. In addition to boat trips up to Byblos, which typically took less than a week, 2 parallel land routes had also come into use. The Way of Horus along the coast, and the King's Highway along the interior. Per Romer, the latter brought copper from southern Jordan to the port of Aqaba on the northeastern Red Sea coast. From there, it was shipped or sent in caravan to Memphis. I should also note that in this era, the typical pack animals were donkeys, not camels. The seaborne trade, in both the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, was conducted in so-called Byblos boats, 70-foot-long ships made of Lebanese cedar wood, each able to carry loads up to 15 tons. In 2008, on the west coast of the Red Sea, archaeologists found the substantial ruins of an ancient port from the times of Khufu. As Romer relates, 30 caves held the remains of boat timbers and rope, along with numerous water pots to carry fresh water from a nearby spring. The locals interfaced with a parallel settlement 30 miles across the Red Sea on the Sinai Peninsula. A staging post and processing station for copper and turquoise being extracted from the lands behind the beach. After a long reign of 29 years, Khufu was succeeded by his eldest son, Djedefre. Djedefre's own pyramid tomb, at Abu Rawash, north of Giza, was quarried for stone during the Roman Empire, and now stands mostly in ruins. After reigning for 11 years, Djedefre was succeeded by his brother Khafre, who raised the second largest Giza pyramid. His pyramid complex also includes the Great Sphinx. a massive lion-bodied statue carved from the local bedrock, featuring a human face likely modeled on Khafre, or possibly on his predecessor, Djedefre. Beneath a temple near the Sphinx, archaeologists recovered one of Egypt's most celebrated masterpieces, a life-size statue of the pharaoh Khafre flanked by the wings of the Egyptian hawk god Horus. After his own reign of 25 years, Khafre was succeeded by his son Menkaure, who raised the smallest of the three main Giza pyramids. Menkaure also left us a few stunning statues, including one of him and his queen, Ka-Merenebti II, several of the pharaoh flanked by the goddess Hathor on one side and the personified deities of Egypt's nomes on the other, and, last but not least, a life-sized alabaster statue of the pharaoh seated on a throne. After reigning about 2 decades, Menkaure was succeeded by Shepseskaf, possibly a son or brother, who decided to break with dynastic tradition and build a throwback mastaba-style tomb at Saqqara. Shepseskaf's death around 2500 brought an end to the 4th Egyptian dynasty. Okay, Scott, we know what they built, but what the heck else did they do? Fair question, and I wish I had a good answer. I mean, Egyptians were certainly writing things down, and not all of it was on perishable material. Per Romer, surviving annals record when a statue of a god was made, a land colonized, a chapel built, a census undertaken, but nothing even remotely resembling any kind of narrative history. Most surprisingly, there is absolutely zero reference to pyramid construction. Not one word. As if doing so had become as natural as the Nile's flow, an occasion barely worth mentioning. Actually, that's a bad comparison. Egyptians kept meticulous records of the height of the yearly Nile flood. But still, it's very odd. We know that Pharaoh sat at the apex of a massive procurement network, one whose tendrils stretched from modern Lebanon to Sudan and from the Sinai to the Western Desert. We know they engaged a substantial portion of the adult male population in serial acts of monumental construction, while the remainder produced the food surpluses that allowed the kingdom to thrive. Other than that, we can only speak in the negative. Per Romer, nothing in the surviving records suggests that the era of the Memphite pharaohs was anything other than a time of peace, when the court had spent its surpluses on building pyramids and tombs and temples, and there had been no significant enemies. A visitor from contemporary Mesopotamia would have been completely blown away. Not so much by the pyramids, though yes, of course, by the pyramids, but mainly by the fact that not everyone was fighting one another. I mean, just for comparison, the end of the 4th Egyptian dynasty, around 2500 BC, was about the time that Ur-Namshi took the throne of Lagash and went to war against Umma and Ur. And just to tease next episode, even when Mesopotamia was quote-unquote unified under a single ruler, almost every single subject territory was looking for a chance to rebel. So yeah, just very different regional experiences. The 5th dynasty was inaugurated by Userkaf, who may have been from a different line than the previous pyramid builders. Despite that, or maybe to legitimize himself, Userkaf did build a pyramid at Saqqara. But as Romer notes, Userkaf's pyramid and all the other 5th dynasty pyramids were smaller and less well built than those at Giza. After roughly a century of continuous operation, the Egyptian pyramid building machine was finally winding down, and royal architects soon turned their attention to raising a new type of monument. Across the Nile from Memphis was the ancient cult center of the Egyptian sun god Re or Ra, the site later known to the Greeks as Heliopolis. Its focal point was the Ben, a kind of stumpy obelisk capped with gold, for want of a better description. The Ben was apparently a massive deal, to the point that the Giza pyramids were supposedly laid out to align with it. And it was at Abu Sir, to the south of Giza, that Userkaf's builders raised a new temple that was also aligned with the Ben. The temple's layout was novel, open to the sky, and centered around its own stumpy Ben-like obelisk. The complex, named the Fortress of Ra, was the first Egyptian sun temple. Of the 9 known Fifth Dynasty kings, at least 6, possibly 7, raised both expertly crafted sun temples and shoddily crafted pyramid tombs, mostly at Abu Sir. Each temple was dedicated to a different aspect of the sun god Ra: the field of Ra, the favorite place of Ra, the offering place of Ra, joy of the heart of Ra, and the horizon of Ra. The temples reflected a new priority of connecting Ra to the pharaoh, as either his earthly manifestation or possibly his son. Inscriptions also use a new hieroglyph, the circle of the sun joined to the wings of a hawk, giving birth to the deity Ra Harakti. Per Romer, the sun temples held great offering tables at the center of their upper courtyards, as well as elaborate drainage systems and rows of elegant alabaster basins. Taken together, the design represents practical arrangements for herding, slaughtering, and butchering large quantities of cattle. The industrial scale is fairly striking. Data suggests that the 2 excavated sun temples alone could have supplied more than 200 cow carcasses a day to the pharaonic court, which makes more sense when you pause to consider how much that court was expanding. According to Romer, the period saw both an increasing number of courtiers' tombs and a lengthening list of names and titles recorded in them. The growing pharaonic administration meant increasing numbers of courtly dead, whose cults were served by a growing Egyptian priesthood. In an early version of work from home, an increasing number of royal courtiers were relocating to the provinces. In conjunction, fine stone tombs, and the copper tools needed to craft them, also began spreading south from Memphis toward the old Nakadan heartlands of Upper Egypt. Tomb scenes suggest that some estates were breeding and fattening cows to ship to the new sun temples. After ruling Egypt for 7 years, Userkaf was succeeded by his son Sahure, or he who is close to Ra. So, Sun Temple, check, Shoddy Pyramid, check, both of which were raised at Abu Sir. In contrast to Sahure's Soso Pyramid, the associated mortuary temple was a hotbed of artistic innovation. For one thing, it was the very first temple to use palmiform columns topped by palm tree-shaped capitals, which became such a mainstay of later Egyptian temple architecture. Sahure's mortuary temple was also decorated with 110,000 square feet of finely crafted reliefs. Along with images of the king fishing and fowling and hunting wild bulls and hippopotamuses, they feature one-of-a-kind scenes of the pharaoh gardening and of a pyramid capstone, or pyramidion, being brought to a pyramid complex. Several reliefs show Byblos boats returning from Levantine ports, while another set documents the first known expedition to the land of Punt, the African coast to the south of Nubia, returning with gold and ebony, frankincense and myrrh, exotic pelts, and sapling incense trees. Sahure reigned for 13 years before dying around 2477 BC. In his wake, the throne passed to his eldest son, then to 3 of his grandsons in series, each of whom built both a shoddy pyramid and a pretty amazing sun temple. The last of these grandsons, Neusere-Ini, came to power in the 2450s and would rule the lands of Egypt for 30-odd years, roughly the same time and duration as his Sumerian counterpart, Akhenaten of Lagash. At least partly due to his supersized reign, Ini went a bit pyramid crazy, building 1 for himself, 2 for his queens, and 3 more for his father, mother, and brother, all in the region of Abu Sir and all 5th Dynasty shabby. Ini also raised the largest and best preserved Egyptian sun temple, the one called Joy of the Heart of Ra. It's mostly in the 50 years between Sahuri's death and the end of Neusere-Ini's reign that all the trends we mentioned earlier, enlarging court, ballooning priesthood, migrating tombs, and work from home, really kicked into gear. Ini's own contribution was allowing the governors of Egyptian nomes to reside in the provinces they ruled instead of at the royal court. Ini was succeeded by a son or nephew named, help me out here, Menkaure-Kaiu, whose 8-year reign is mainly known for 3 things: building the last Egyptian sun temple, siting his pyramid at Saqqara instead of Abu Sir, and paving the way for the next major pharaoh, a son, brother, or possibly cousin, named Djedkare-Isesi. The pharaoh Isesi would rule over Egypt for the following 39 years, and we'll get into his story right after this short break.
What does every USAA member have in common? Family. We're one big family who supports the military community and their eligible families. And if you, your parent, or spouse served, you could join our family and save big on auto insurance. Visit USAA.com/join today to check your eligibility. Membership eligibility and product restrictions apply and are subject to change. USAA means United Services Automobile Association and its affiliates, San Antonio, Texas.
Test, check 1, 2. You know you need unique New York. You know you need unique New York. Does that sound all right? Ah, that's better. You can always tell something's missing when you get isolated results, like AI that's only right for one of your systems. Get AI that can work across your data and applications. Learn more at IBM.com. The AI built for business. IBM.
I mentioned Isesi in my intro episode, since his religious and administrative reforms are often seen as the beginning of the end of the Egyptian Old Kingdom. His most consequential changes were increasing the size of the provincial administration and allowing nomarchs to manage projects previously run by the court. Isesi also allowed provincial offices and their incomes to be passed down from father to son, which basically created a group of wealthy, powerful provincial families only nominally under royal control, all of which can be safely filed under diffusion of pharaonic power. Isesi also reorganized his court, including titles, ranks, and entry requirements, and divided power among 3 viziers, 2 in Memphis and 1 down south in Abydos. The viziers were put in charge of both the vast Egyptian scribal administration and the weaponry of the state, i.e. the Egyptian military. In a related note, the tomb of one of Isesi's officials holds one of the earliest depictions of Egyptian warfare, with soldiers scaling the walls of a Canaanite fortress. One of the most important and least understood aspects of Isesi's rule is the rapid about-face from worship of Ra to worship of the god Osiris, judge and lord of the dead and of the underworld. In a related development, Isesi was also the first 5th Dynasty pharaoh not to build a sun temple, And like his predecessor, Assisi's pyramid was raised at Saqqara rather than at Ra-centric Abu Sir. So, why Osiris? Turns out that is a really, really good question, and one that nobody has a solid answer to. According to Racheli Shalomi Hen, Osiris appears absolutely nowhere in Egyptian religious thought prior to Assisi's reign. In fact, the representation of Osiris's name even suggests a potential foreign origin. Either way, immediately after his first appearance, in the private monuments of several high officials, Osiris apparently went viral. While his sudden popularity remains a mystery, Shalomi Hen suggests that the fact that Osiris offered everyone, not just the king, the possibility of a pleasant afterlife was likely part of the equation. By embracing Osiris instead of Ra, Assisi was associating himself with a lesser-tier god, and thereby reducing his own standing. Per Hans Gödecke, Assisi was also abandoning his role as sole guarantor of the afterlife, a change which demythologized his position, making him fully human yet still socially dominant. So, we're all getting the general drift here, right? Still, apart from the swap out of Ra for Osiris, these were mostly long-term, slow-burn changes. So, no alarm bells quite yet. After ruling for nearly 40 years, Assisi finally passed away around 2375 BC, just a few years before Lugal-Zaggisi took power in Mesopotamia. Assisi was succeeded by a son named Wenis or Unis, who'd rule for the next 3 decades. No sun temple, but his pyramid was special in 2 respects. First, it was the smallest pyramid of the entire Old Kingdom, and second, it held a very special inscription. Carved and painted on the walls of the corridor, antechamber, and burial chamber were a series of 283 magic spells. The spells, known as the Pyramid Texts, were designed to help the king complete the journey through the underworld to attain the afterlife. They also include the earliest version of the so-called Osiris myth, the story of the conflict between Horus and Set, and of Osiris's death and resurrection. Wenis was succeeded by his son-in-law Teti. The fact that Teti is considered founder of a new 6th dynasty and took the throne name He Who Pacifies the Two Lands suggests the transition may not have been entirely smooth. Though it's also true that many officials of the previous king continued serving in Teti's court, and they apparently did pretty well for themselves. Teti's vizier and son-in-law, Mereruka, built himself a massive mastaba-style tomb at Saqqara with 33 richly carved rooms, the largest known tomb of any Egyptian noble. According to Manetho, after 12 years of rule, Teti was murdered by his royal bodyguards, another Egyptian first, which is hard to directly ascribe to the reduced prestige of the role of pharaoh, but it could have been some kind of factor. After his death, a short-lived pharaoh named Userkare took the Egyptian throne. 2 years later, Teti's son Pepi I came to power and gave Userkare the damnatio memoriae treatment, removing his name from the tombs of contemporary nobles. So something unusual had happened. We're just not sure exactly what. Pepi I came to power very young, and to go on to rule Egypt for the following 50 years, between about 2330 and 2280 BC. And, spoiler alert, this did not make him the longest reigning 6th dynasty pharaoh. Lots to say about Pepi I. To start with, dude saw the direction the kingdom was heading and did what he could to change course. To tighten his hold over the nomes, he installed new officials of non-noble birth to act as his personal agents. He also supported the rise of alternate provincial centers to counterbalance the main cities, and implemented a vast building program of temples to himself and to local gods all over Egypt to keep his presence fresh in people's minds. Like his predecessors, Pepi also kept engaged beyond the kingdom's frontiers, launching quarrying expeditions into the Sinai Peninsula, increasing the caravan trade with the western desert oases, and continuing relations with Byblos. But in contrast to his predecessors, Pepi's style of foreign policy was heavily steeped in militarism. He launched at least one campaign into Nubia and a further 5 against the sand dwellers of both Sinai and southern Canaan. For the latter, soldiers were brought to the Levantine coast on Egyptian transport boats. Once there, inscriptions record they destroyed walled towns, burned local shrines, and cut down orchards and vineyards. Records suggest that armies were assembled on an ad hoc basis. There was still no Egyptian standing army, and that they included contingents of both Libyans and Nubians. The raids may have been intended to secure inland trade, or possibly just to gain plunder. Around 20 years into Pepi's reign, he uncovered a plot by one of his wives to kill him and place her son on the throne. The wife in question was tried and punished, with both her and her son likely executed. In the aftermath, the pharaoh took a few actions to help shore up his reign. First, he changed his praenomen to Meri-Re, beloved of Ra, to tie himself more closely to his respected 5th dynasty forebears. Second, he married not one, but 2 daughters of Kui, the powerful nomarch of Abydos, to secure his hold over the south. One of these wives, Nebet, was also made vizier of Upper Egypt, the first woman to hold such a role, and the last for the next 1,800 years. Toward the end of his reign, Pepi uncovered a second conspiracy, this time by a vizier named Rawer. After foiling the plot, the king decided to strengthen the succession by elevating his son Meren-Re to co-pharaoh, the first such joint reign in Egyptian history. Partly due to his own long reign, Pepi also went a bit pyramid crazy, building no less than 9 pyramids for his royal consorts. His own pyramid, raised at Saqqara, holds the most complete set of pyramid texts ever recovered, 651 spells to aid his passage to the afterlife. One additional monument bears noting. At some point during his reign, Pepi created a copper statue of himself, considered the oldest life-size metal statue ever made. While interesting in itself, it's also worth noting that a few decades later in Mesopotamia, the Akkadian king Ramush would create the second oldest life-size metal statue using tin, which, taken together, would make some pretty amazing Bronze Age bookends. Pepi I passed away in 2283 BC, and his son Meren-Re assumed sole power. During his short 5-year reign, Meren-Re hammered a sizable nail in the coffin of pharaonic rule by giving nomarchs complete control over the taxes and labor in their provinces. Apart from that, he oversaw increased quarrying in the eastern desert and a military campaign into Canaan. One of his courtiers, a man named Eni, also records being sent to Byblos under the majesty of Meren-Re, my lord. I brought back 3 Byblos boats, lapis lazuli, tin, silver, oil, and every good product he desired. Apart from his interest in Byblos and Canaan, the pharaoh's main focus was Nubia. After making agreements with local chiefs, a relief near Aswan shows the king receiving their submission, Merenre dispatched a series of heavily armed caravans to obtain exotic goods. Another powerful courtier, Harkuf, relates his time leading one such caravan to open the road to the foreign land of Yam. I reached it in 7 months, and I returned with 300 donkeys laden with incense, ebony, oil, aromatics, leopard skins, ivory, boomerangs, and all good products. Per Romer, the pharaoh also ordered 5 slipways to be cut at Elephantine to provide boats with safe passage through the Nile's first cataract. Upon Merenre's death, the throne fell to his son, the 6-year-old Pepi II. At least 2 sources, Manetho's Aegyptiaca and the Turin Canon, assign Pepi II a reign of 94 years. Many scholars round this down to a much more reasonable 64, which would still make Pepi II one of the longest reigning pharaohs in all of Egyptian history, possibly only second to Ramesses II. The vast majority of the 23rd century and the end of the Egyptian Old Kingdom both took place on Pepi's watch, so let's dig into it a bit. Pepi II's early reign was overseen by his father's vizier, his uncle Zhao, and his mother, Ankh-Nesmerire. There's even a super cute statuette of little Pepi II on his mother's lap in full pharaonic regalia, the ancient equivalent of a baby pic. There's also a cute, if non-PC story of the young pharaoh being inordinately excited about a person of short stature visiting his court. Quote, "My Majesty desires to see this dwarf more than the gifts of Sinai and Punt." Kids, what can you do? Pyramid crazy? Sure, why not? Along with his own, raised at Saqqara, Pepi II raised 5 for his royal consorts. Like his predecessors, including Merenre, the pharaoh's own pyramid and 2 of his wives were covered in pyramid texts. Otherwise, Pepi II's reign saw ongoing expeditions to Nubia, Sinai, and the Eastern Desert, and ongoing trade links with Byblos. From all appearances, and based on all the records we have, things couldn't have seemed more status quo. Sure, the trends we've been highlighting had been heading in a very decentralized direction, but there's no written record of anything coming to a head. All we know is that shortly after Pepi's death, toward the end of the 23rd century, all monumental construction and all royal inscriptions totally, completely stopped, and would remain stopped for at least a generation. In fact, as Romer relates, for the next century and a half, not one king, not one court utilized the kingdom's resources, the river, the copper, the wheat crop, to build any kind of sizable stone monument. It doesn't really qualify as a bang or a whimper, just absolute radio silence. There is one major worldwide event that coincides almost exactly. The onset of a century of increased dryness and reduced Nile flow, called the 4.2 kiloyear BPE aridification event. So we'll be taking our leave of Egypt for this season at the precipice of what's known as the First Intermediate Period. Next episode, we'll return to Mesopotamia under the legendary conqueror Lugal-Zaggisi and learn what became of the empire he forged. In particular, we'll see how his humbling of King Ur-Zababa of Kish enabled the rise of the most powerful ruler of the ancient world, Sargon of Akkad. Would you like to listen to ad-free episodes of The Ancient World and a bunch of other great history podcasts? Then go to The Ancient World Podcast on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to Airwave History Plus. You'll get a free 7-day trial to listen to ad-free episodes, bonus content, and more from the largest collection of history podcasts anywhere. So subscribe to Airwave History Plus on Apple Podcasts today.